Hello, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you've come via YouTube and want to know more about what we do, just head over to officehours.global. That's our primary web portal. It'll give you more information and links to things that are relevant to the show. Also, remember, the questions drive the conversation here, and you can use the QR code that'll show up at the bottom of the screen throughout the program, or go to askofficehours.global on the web, and that'll let you submit your questions into today's question queue. Today, our second hour, we're talking the basics of color correction, LUTs, base grading, looks, stuff like that. So if you're relatively new in the process or just want a refresher course of some sort, that's what we'll be discussing. We'll be showing you examples of how color correction works in certain circumstances, and it should be a fun second hour. Of course, this is our first hour, and here we concentrate on your interests and concerns. So, Mitch, what's our first question for today?
Thank you, Bill. Our first question is a QR code question coming in from John Jordan in Edison, New Jersey. I'm building a 3-camera podcast studio in a small room using Blackmagic Studio Camera 4Ks. I'm looking to wall mount them on some sort of arm that will allow a small range of movement to reframe camera angles, depending on the number of guests. What are your thoughts?
Alex.
Yeah, if you do wall mount for cameras, you're going to get a lot of different options, and it really depends on the wall and how much weight and how much control you have. But things like this. So here's what you can see here is a wall mount that is going to give you much of what you're looking for, which is you get it into the wall. Just going to make sure you got to find the studs and make sure that you have you're in the right place to put that to attach this. But now you have kind of a bit of a head that you can work with. That what you're going to want probably, especially if you're not going to operate it, is some sort of ball head. The one I just showed you, the ball head may be too small for what you're doing, but it probably could hold on to those cameras. But you want to be thinking about those types of, it's that type of arm that comes out with a ball head mount to make that work.
Mitchell.
You could also get some purchase with a Varipole, which would allow you to stick the pole at whatever angle or close to the wall, wherever you have to have it, and then a super clamp with the aforementioned ball head to keep the camera so you can move it around. But sometimes if you're in an apartment or a place where you can't penetrate the walls, that would be a alternative. That's what I did here, except I did it horizontally.
Courtney.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was going to suggest, like a Varipole vertically, and then get you one of these VESA mounts that designed for mounting a monitor and replace the end of it here with a mount that ball head that the camera could go on. That might be a solution for you too. That has an arm that you could swing out, and so you could change the angle a little bit without having to move the vertical pole.
This is why I think everybody here on the panel probably has a couple of boxes full of grip gear parts. You go, I need to put something on the wall, and you reach in and you look for some kind of wall mounting plate or cheese plate or something that you can start with and then adapt to most anything. That stuff just seems to grow as you go through your career. Let's go to our next question.
Next up is Douglas Carmichael. MixHalo, an L Acoustics partner, has released AI-based tools that stream real-time interpretation to the user's device at a live event. What does this mean for interpreters in the future?
Alex, what do you think?
This is a pretty interesting pivot. So MixHalo has been out for a while, and what they did is they were trying to build immersive experiences. The reason that they're partners with L Acoustic is they're building immersive experiences to your mobile phone. So they're really working on very, very low latency delivery of music so they could be at a venue and hear better music than what's at the venue, which is often. And but it kind of, a lot of us looked at it going, well, the one reason you go to the venue is to hear it with everybody else, to hear people around you. I'm not sure that this is going to work. So a lot of us looked at this when it came out and were kind of uncertain. They've now pivoted to something going on that's actually a pretty good idea, which is the idea that they're being able to deliver real-time interpretation. I believe this is all going to be AI-driven interpretation that you're going to be able to listen to in real time and pick anything. I think that for on-site interpreters, this is probably the beginning of the end of being there. On-site interpretation is pretty hard to do well. And so I've done a fair bit of it. You get 6 boxes or 12 boxes, and you have the politics of picking what languages you support, and it's relatively expensive, and people have to take breaks every 20 minutes. And there's just a lot of, things that you have to work through that are pretty heavy. And I think that on-site interpretation is going to have a hard time. I think that there's still high-end events that are going to use it, but what you are going to see is that I think that with technologies like this, whether it's this one or not, that you're going to see a point where most above average sized events will deliver to you 30 to 60 languages instantly that you can listen to. Will they be perfectly accurate? No. Are the humans accurate? No. So that when we say, oh, it's not going to be that accurate, the amount of time I've had to spend talking to clients about why interpreters can't be perfect every single time they're listening to something in real time. It happens. I literally have to do a pre-build basically set my clients up for for that process of there's going to be people that are upset about the interpretation. You need to know that. They're going to come back and say this word wasn't right and this phrase wasn't right and this changed the meaning of everything. And that's just part of the process. So I think that you're going to see this kind of pick up speed. It is very dependent on the quality of the audio. So the AI is only as good as the audio. So this comes back to mics, and this comes back to speakers, and this comes back to those things. As those things aren't as accurate or as good, or there's too much echo, the quality drops pretty dramatically.
Next question. Courtney, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I took a look at the video. A lot of the video, it's going to use AI to do the translation to text and then the text to voice. And I would imagine the latency is going to be a little bit high on that, because in order for AI to do a good translation, and AI can do really much more accurate translation because it can look at the stuff in context and use that large language, model to get the right word and the right tense of the verb and so on after it sees the whole sentence. Because it goes back and it changes the sentence after it understands, oh, I used the wrong word here, so let me go back and fix that. And it goes back and fixes that. However, that increases the latency, and you don't want to have that translated immediately into audio because it'll be changing constantly and it'll be impossible to understand. So you have to have some built-in latency there for the AI to, finish the sentence and get it right. Because a lot of languages like Spanish have, gender-specific verbs, and so if you don't know you're talking about a woman or a man until you get the pronoun, well, she said, oh, we're talking about a woman. Sammy was a woman. Oh, okay. Then you have to go back and change the tense of the verbs to get it correct. That's why a lot of translators, as well as automated translation, gets it wrong on the first try. But once you have the whole context there, it can go back and correct. But and this, of course, then generates it. You choose your language, and then it transmits on a little phone app so that people have their phones, and so they can follow along in the language of their choice on their phones. But I don't think they said what the latency is. I didn't get a chance to watch the whole video, so I imagine it's a number of seconds late to get that translation. So if you're watching live, it may be a little disconcerting because the person you're watching may have moved on to the next subject. So by the time you hear what they're saying.
Alex.
I'm not clear that the AI will be any slower than a human. I mean, typically we expect the translator to be 3 to 6 seconds behind what they're saying anyway. So I think that I don't know if the translation will be any slower. In fact,
it has to go to text and then to the text to speech. So.
The text to speech will be instant, and the speech to text will be almost instant. I think if you give it a 3 to 4 second window, it can do all of that pretty quickly. So I don't know if I'm not clear that it'll be any slower than humans, and I think that the problem is that it will then speed up. That's the thing that it typically, once it gets to a point where it's the same speed as humans, and again, when anything we do, we just have to look at this new realm as anything that you are doing that you feel like is boring. Don't worry, you won't be doing it for much longer. Anything that is repetitive and mechanical and doesn't require you to keep growing is most likely going to be replaced by a machine. And so we have to kind of keep that in the back of our head. Is that you have to be always the lesson for us is always to be moving forward. You've got to keep moving forward because if anything that becomes something, I can just go in, I can dial it in or call it in, probably not going to be there much longer. So that's the thing that we have to kind of keep in the back of our head.
I was just having fun last night. I was about to go to sleep, and I was watching something, I think whether they were TikTok videos or shorts or something. And it was fun because I had a lot of content coming in that was captioned by the producers. And I also had the I think it was YouTube captioning on. And it was just so much fun to see how YouTube compared to what the actual text was, because there were a lot of very amusing errors.
Well,
how it understood.
And I think that when you have time to go back and work on it, a lot of us, like even some of the stuff that I've been playing with Opus, I go back and fix words and fix phrases
Right.
and fix things like that. And that's the case if you have anybody do it, that they have time to stop and do that. I think that where there's a lot of opportunity for the AI to do well is the things that are done in real time, because it will be able to get up to that speed. And right now, it will be able to do it as fast as a human and as well as a human at speed in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's the thing we have to kind of get our head around.
Let's go to the next question.
Paul Wallace from Starling Plaza, Texas. DP Review bit the dust, or did it? What news sources are focused like a laser beam on the topics of interest to folks in office hours? I'm talking lighting, audio, video, streaming, and the stuff we talk about every day.
Alex, what do you think?
I have to admit that there's not a lot of places. I mean, most of the new information that I gather is mostly from this organization, so from this show. Most of my information is from people asking questions and me going, "Oh, that's a good idea. That's something I should look at." So if you're a producer, when you actually ask questions here, you're kind of pointing us towards things that we should do further research on. I haven't. With DPP Review, I think the problem that they had partially was that people like me would scan through for certain things, but very rarely read all of it. I think there was a little bit there for everybody, but I think it was hard to, and it wasn't something that I was regularly going to. And I think that part of that is that the camera market has become, less vibrant. And so I think that that's the. Those are some of the challenges there. I have to admit that the things that I read every day are either, I have Flipboard and Apple News. I go to TechMeme. There's a couple CEOs that that I know that I've worked with that they live by TechMeme, and I didn't even know what it was. But it kind of gives you kind of what's going on in tech, at least. And then a lot of it's things that get posted on Twitter or LinkedIn. I have a pretty large network in LinkedIn, so people will post things, and I'll go, oh, I should check that out, and that type of thing. But those are my major sources.
Courtney?
Yeah, DP Review used to do some really in-depth comparisons of all the specifications of cameras or whatever they were reviewing to like the last version or other competitors that are in the same price class. These days, I've always liked Curtis Judd does good reviews of audio, video equipment, and good comparisons against, he'll put one audio recording device up against another and let you compare them side by side, which is a good way to compare them. Potato Jet for cameras. Most of these are YouTube influencers are a lot more superficial. They'll talk about they'll show some examples of what it did good and what it did bad, but they won't get too heavily into the technical specifications of it. So if you want a complete review with all the tech specs, you're probably just going to have to go to the manufacturers' websites these days, which usually have a pretty comprehensive list of technical specifications.
Let's go to the next question.
David Brady in New York, asked 2110 and Blackmagic design. They have conversion and capture. When can we expect 2110 capable switchers, vision mixers?
Alex, what do you think?
Every NAB, we're going to go, well, is this the year? Is this the year we're getting? I mean, they now are releasing switchers with Ethernet jacks. So it feels like you may already have some 2110 switchers that you just don't know that they can do 2110 yet. So that's my guess, is that they may already, some of these may be able to be upgraded in a firmware to go to that. I do think that I always felt like the reason that Blackmagic wasn't really investing in, they weren't really investing in SDI's routers. They finally did an 80 by 80 router, but they weren't really investing in it because I felt like they just knew that they were going to go to Ethernet. And then why bother keep going down this path? But I think it's been a little bit tricky for them to get through that. I do think that most likely you'll see a heavier push into 2110 from Blackmagic this year or next year. I'm not sure if it'll be this year, but I think it'll be one of these 2 years. I think that's probably the trajectory of their hardware.
Courtney?
Well, maybe on their Constellation, their higher-end switchers, you may see it. All of our switchers have Ethernet jacks on them right now, Alex, but they're not used for input. They're used for output and control, mainly. But 2110 is a fairly complex protocol, and it requires some pretty good infrastructure to handle it and deal with it. And I think ATEM really is looking more for the bottom end of the professional market and the top end of the consumer market. So I don't think 2110 is going to make a very big push into that prosumer market anytime soon. So I put it a little further off into the future.
Mitchell.
What kind of infrastructure, Courtney, would that require as far as the switch goes? Is this more than 1 gigabyte? Certainly got to be
much more.
Much more. At least 10 gigs.
Yeah, at least 10. Really 40 or 100
Yeah.
gig, connections are really what you're looking for.
Next question.
Roscoe Jones from Madison, Indiana. If AI is going to do all kinds of metadata tagging of video clips, wouldn't Final Cut Pro with its advanced tagging features be the best NLE for all this new AI metadata?
Alex, what do you think?
I think probably out of the gate, Final Cut is probably one of the best to manage metadata. It's been built around that from day one. Day two. When they moved to Final Cut 10, when they shifted over, they really built it around databases and metadata, and so it definitely is going to do this very well. I think that there's a lot of work that Adobe and Blackmagic are doing with their products to really take advantage of metadata and tagging and so on and so forth. So I don't know if Final Cut has any lead here. I think that it's only short-lived because I think that the other two are spending probably what it feels like more effort on some of the AI solutions than Apple is at the moment. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year.
Mitchell.
Yeah, that sound you hear are all the tech boffins out there typing away with the programming to do that, to all the editing programs. But somehow I feel that Avid will be the last to do it.
I don't doubt that.
And when as we talk about this, because I think part of what brought this up, of course, is Strata.tech, that we had Michael Cioni on last week. A reminder, 9 o'clock today is when I think he's releasing the new video about all the things that Strata does. And it's really exciting to show y'all last week.
And since I've been there since the very first day of Final Cut in the new, and I will say this, it's interesting, Final Cut does have the capabilities because it has an internal SQLite database that is tied to its tagging and its entire editorial system. I mean, it's really, truly interwoven in there. It is surprising that they don't expose as much of that database to the user as a lot of us think that they might have been able to. It may have been a really smart thing because that gets really confusing if you start trying to have other things talk into a visual database as Final Cut has implemented. So it's going to be interesting to me to see how they iterate. They're moving many more things into the cloud, and the fact that they've had this database structure since literally day one of Final Cut Pro 10 at the time. They certainly have plenty of expertise in it. Whether they migrate to a different foundation rather than the SQLite database that's in there now, or they just continue to expand hooks into it as they move into 3D and vision and everything else, it's going to be a fascinating thing to watch. They certainly have the talent to make it more interactive. That's kind of an interactive database. It does some of that, but it's not full scale. And I'd be really interesting to see how they're going. With the other programs, I think they're all thinking about what databases maybe a little bit used to be, and I haven't seen any of them take the kind of leap that Final Cut did with user tagging, user-generated metadata, as opposed to imported metadata or metadata created by AI inside the program. Those are just my thoughts about it. We'll see how it goes. Going to the next question.
Danny Grizzle from Longview, Texas. Yesterday, just as Alex was throwing shade on classroom lectures being repurposed as online content, Epiphan introduced their new appliance, the Pearl Nexus, optimized for that exact purpose. What are your comments?
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, Epiphan is the company that released that, and what I'm going to say. I'm not saying that repurposing classrooms and talking on stages is not a business. I think that Epiphan is probably going down a business that makes sense. I think that there's probably lots of legs in it over the next 5 to 10 years. What I was saying yesterday is that we should back up every once in a while and ask should we do this? Not that people aren't doing it, not that the conventional wisdom is that we do it, because what happens is when you constantly are doing something that is probably not the future and what people don't really want, it creates a position of fragility where things will shift very quickly. If you look at like what is disruption, disruption is oftentimes people have gone out on a ledge of things that people don't really want. And then suddenly that collapses because somebody figures out how to drop a pin somewhere in that ledge, and just pull and everything. And that's why when you wonder, like, how did something happen so suddenly? How did this all move? How did this all just shift over? It's because it was getting brittle and someone took advantage of the brittleness. And so what I'm pointing towards is the brittleness is this idea that we have to give lectures, in front of a classroom or stand up on a stage and release a product instead of making a video. Epiphan didn't even do that. Like Epiphan did it in his little studio. So my point. Exactly. If they really wanted to show the product off, they should stand up in front of a classroom and show the Epiphan doing it. It would be, why they didn't do that is because it wouldn't be very good. And so the thing is that, so I think that the Pearl Nexus is a great product and it's going to sell a lot of things to people that are in the past. But it is the past. And we just need to know that we as media producers want to constantly be getting ready, knowing the past still exists in the present, but there's a future coming where we stop doing this, and it is going to arrive. Like I am now clear as you start to see what Apple's doing, as you start to see more schools going online, as you start to see all these things, people are going to stop doing these classroom records and the teachers are going to sit down and go, well, how do we do this in a more effective way? And that, because really what we're doing here is experimenting with that. And what I mean by that is, and you're going to see us do more experimentation in this area. What classrooms really should look like, in my opinion, and what I think we're going to end up going towards is we're going to have teachers or companies releasing videos for everyone to watch, putting out a video that everyone can see a week before or days before or hours before. Let people watch them and then discuss it with them. Do Q&A, open Q&A like office hours and have that. And that's going to be a much more interactive because the conversation will be better if people have time to look at it. So and so people see the video and can think about it and discuss it and then come and talk about it. That conversation will be better and much more interesting to sit in. And there's a better reason for everyone to be in one place at one time, like what we do here. And so I think that is a glimpse of the future. I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's where we're going.
Mitchell?
First of all, Alex, thanks for correcting my pronunciation. Epiphany. I maybe had an epiphany when I saw it, but the fact that the device can record and can schedule and play back a meeting was a bit of an eye-opener for me because I don't do that every day like you do. So it seems to me that having an appliance that can do all of that for you does have some kind of connection to some people that are sort of maybe in the entry level.
Well, it's really for a school that has 300 classrooms. This is great. You can put it in the back of it. It just automatically records the class. It puts it up. It's just that I've spent a lot of time being excited that Yale or Berkeley or others or MIT will put their classes up, and then I open those and I sit for about 5 minutes, and I'm like, it is it's basically a way to get through insomnia, because you get up there, and I literally have a narcoleptic reaction to classroom videos. So I think for me, it's I can't watch them more than 5 minutes before my eyes just start drooping, and they're so static and so because this is solving the record problem. It's not solving the camera problem, which is this big wide camera and nothing's really there. It's just. And it has some features that'll put this up. And I know that there's a bunch of people in education and other people watching this. They're going to be very up in arms about what I'm saying. But I'm just telling you that it's going to get replaced because it is not a compelling experience. And people are used to the abuse, but that doesn't mean that they're going to keep on doing it if something comes out better. And this is where we see disruption. I'm just going to put the pin in the ground. You're going to see this get disrupted in 5 or 10 years. Within the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see this disrupted because this is not a stable place to stand. It's good for right now, and you can make money with it right now, and I'm sure Epiphan will do well right now. But you do not want to be standing on this ledge, 5 or 10 years from now, because someone is going to disrupt it, and then it's just going to. This is when you see something in the world just disappear. It disappears because no one really liked it anyway, and then they were given another option, and they all stampeded to that other option.
Interesting discussion. And for me, the one thing that I've been thinking about while you've been talking about this, because I believe in most of what you're saying, but for me, the challenge is I come out of marketing and advertising, and that was a process of trying to gather an audience so that you could affect them. Classrooms also have done that. You're telling people, everybody come here at this time, and here's the topic, and here's what we're going to be dealing with. As this training, online education, as everything becomes more and more diffuse, so there's not that gathering of people at the beginning, then all of a sudden I think marketing for education changes a lot. And I'm trying to think what's going to replace that. How are you going to figure out? I guess it's social media and all the rest of the things we're dealing with now.
I will argue that it's more of the kind of thing that we're doing here. It won't be exactly what we're doing here, but more of companies being available. Like, why did I get the idea of calling this office hours? Because Google does this. Google does a thing called office hours, where their developers will jump on a live stream, once a week and answer questions about their products. And I think that more companies need to do that. More companies need to think about, how do we engage our audience, not every once in a while when they want to do a release, but every single day or every week or every month. Hey, we have people here that are available to answer your questions, and I think that is and interact with you and having, we have the tools now to do that. We didn't have we have to remember, we have to look at everything through the lens of, we created this based on the limitations that we had at the moment we created it. So when lectures were created, the Romans didn't have video, and the Greeks didn't have video. So they stood up in front of a bunch of people and said something. And we didn't really have the video and the access to the tools until the last 10 years, but we've got 3,000 years of weight, kind of just of inertia kind of going down this area. But we have new tools, and again, this is a perfect example of a faster horse. When what I'm saying is, there's a car coming. Like, you may not want to get hit by it, but there's a car coming. And when we talk about making lectures better, we're talking about a faster horse, not a car. And so the thing is that is the, and we're going to keep on, horses were great for 3,000 years. And then in 10 years, we use them for fun. And so the thing is that, and that was back in the day when things didn't move nearly as fast, and so the thing is that we now are in a world where, when the technology gets to a place where it supports this kind of conversation that we're doing here, it supports that we already have a lot of the video distribution, all of those things, people are going to start realizing that, this is way more, you have a much better conversation if you give people the videos. Marques Brownlee released a video about the headset, about the new Apple Vision Pro. He got, I don't know, last night when I went to bed, it was 5 million views. 5 million people watched it. If he and Justine and a couple other people did a roundtable like what we're doing here and said, hey, we're doing a roundtable, we'll take your questions, there'd be a lot of people there. Like, there would be, it'd be 1 million concurrent views of people if they had said, we're going to release our videos. If they release their videos on Thursday and said, on Friday we're going to or release their videos on Tuesday or whatever when they release them, and then on Friday said, we're all going to sit around and do a roundtable with Justine Ezerick and Marques Brownlee and a couple other people, there'd be 1 million concurrent views there with people asking questions, about that process, and so it's not that it can't be done, it's just that people don't know how to do it. I watched there was a cooking company that was doing a live stream yesterday. Live streaming is hard. So the reason that it hasn't taken off for a lot of companies is that they screw it up a lot. And so I watched someone who's a pretty big brand, put together a pretty rough looking live video, live event, and so I think that, that's the, sorry. Courtney posted something.
My only concern is that works for the big names and stuff like that. But what about Jane at Jane Sprockets, who wants, it works. Is the model okay for Jane too? And how does she find that group?
It works way better for Jane. Yeah.
Because how does she find out of those billion websites out there? How does she drive people to get her message, to get the interactivity going?
So number one is when you look at, first of all, take a look at what YouTubers do. YouTubers are, they do things, they know that the first 100 will be not watched, so someone has to be ready to do things over and over and over again. To build up where they're looking for it. The second thing is that there is things like Google AdWords and Facebook, advertising, and those are very effective. So effective that they are, people that we just had a congressional, meeting about them yesterday. So these ad tools people aren't upset about them because they're not effective. they're extremely effective. So
Point taken.
So you're going to have marketing that pushes people towards that process. But the main thing is don't market it. There's that thing from Joe versus the Volcano that I repeat over and over again. I know you can get the job, but can you do the job? And so make sure that you can put together a great live stream before. Like, we didn't publish Office Hours until I felt like we were minimally viable. Like the first 6 months of Office Hours sat in we don't put those anywhere because we were still figuring our way out. And even then, we were just willing to put it on, and we weren't promoting it. Now we're starting to promote that. You're seeing shorts come out and other things because I feel like we've got a great looking product that works fairly smoothly. But you got to be careful about, as a brand, to put out things that aren't working at the beginning, and you have to work potentially with professionals like people in this group that will help you make something look tight. Or tight-ish. It doesn't have to be. Conversation doesn't. If you're answering people's questions, you don't have to be nearly as tight as if you're doing a show. So the video that you build, and again, the reference is our YouTubers. Look at how many YouTubers are doing something that is relatively simple. They've got one camera. They've got a microphone. They're recording these things. They're doing simple animations, things that they could do in Keynote. They're doing all these things, and that's what companies need to think about when they're talking about their products. Because there is no center, like we just talked about with DP Review. And so I think that it's really, really important it's a great question, but I think it's really important for us as media developers to realize there's this whole world that's coming that's available to us. And it's part of why this show exists is to prepare everybody for what is coming. And that is going to be a huge amount of more video mixed with conversations and Q&A and communities. But companies are really far behind in this area right now, but they won't be forever.
Interesting discussion. Let's go to the next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Will Office Hours explore streaming beyond the YouTube? We find LinkedIn quite fruitful. Last week's Mozilla two-person live panel added 4,300 views.
Alex, what's the state of our distribution?
I actually view LinkedIn as the most important, but I have to do it to my own channel. And so part of it has been us making sure that the multi-streaming stuff works. We found we did a couple tests. We'll do more next week. That the multicasting is working to YouTube. The next step will be Twitter. We'll probably add Facebook. The last one will probably be LinkedIn, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters the most. so we're making sure that all the little bits and pieces of how we put this together, that QR code that we work so hard on, that we put up, this little askofficehours.global, that is all built for LinkedIn. So I totally agree with you, and you'll see us wrapping up to that. But we should be starting to do a stream or two to LinkedIn per month by March. So just keep your eyes on that. But we're definitely focused on it because, with all of these things, when you see the streams, just as you know, just to know if you're watching our shorts, we have new shorts. There's a shelf on our page that says shorts. If you go there, if you see our any posts that we do on LinkedIn, Twitter, those shorts, if you're willing to, give them a thumbs up, because what it'll do is it'll help the algorithms look at us, and we'll see if it gets out to more people.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael coming in with a question. I've heard that many broadcasters and distributors, Discovery and Netflix, for example, have specific approved cameras you must use when producing content for them. How rigidly do they enforce that requirement?
Courtney, start us off.
Well, every year Netflix publishes, does a survey of the cameras that are out there, and they publish a list, and they expend a lot of money creating test footage from the cameras that they approve on their approved list. And the reason they do it is for especially for dramatic, they have a little more leeway. This is their list. You can find it online. And they insist that at least 90%, if it's dramatic film, be captured with their approved list. And they have their approved requirements for the cameras that are on that list with resolution, the codec, the bit depth, the data rate, the color space, the transfer function. They also have to support time code. And there are these cameras, Arri, Canon, Panasonic, Red, Panavision, Sony, and Blackmagic, are the current leaders on the list, are ones that are primarily on the list. And they say that 90% of the runtime of the footage used in your production, if it's a dramatic production, need to meet those requirements. And it's to give a uniform look to, they don't want stuff that is far below the viewing quality of their channel, because they don't want it to reflect badly on their channel. There are exceptions to this, of course, if you're doing documentary work, because that could include, library footage or footage shot on camcorders, et cetera, from the 60s. So, and it is amazing if you do get a chance to go. It's kind of boring, but they do release a cinema quality release, DCI, of the camera tests, where they test all of these cameras in low light, high light, moving, all types of dramatic situations, all type of lighting situations, and you can compare them, each one of them side by side. And it's quite interesting if you can get to a screening of one of those in a theater.
Mitchell?
Yeah, it's all about quality, and Netflix has decided, for example, that they're going to decide what that quality is. I would think that a aspiring DP might pay attention to it, but an established DP may have their own way of getting things done. And that sort of concerns me just a little bit, that they have to be the taste masters when it comes to that. But as far as to how rigidly they enforce that, I mean, what does Discovery do when they have to use a stunt camera inside a car shooting something? Apparently, they have to break their own rules.
Yeah, that's where the 90% comes in.
Yeah. What Mitch said, you can do, the stunt camera is usually much less than 90% of that footage. And so you can put whatever you want in there. And even now, I talked to my brother about this, and he's like, oh, those Blackmagic cameras make great stunt cameras. So they're already kind of revving up there. I think that if you look at the guidelines that Netflix provides, any established DP is already using those cameras. Like they're not very stodgy about this. They're pretty aggressive about making sure that there's enough cameras in there. What I will also say is that if you go up to Netflix and you Netflix imaging or Netflix cameras and you do a search and you get to this partner help center that Netflix has, this is the most current and the most thorough explanation of production processes on the internet. Like it's a tome of how to do sound and how to do post and how to do, and all these other things. It's not going to tell you step by step how to do it, but the guidelines there, if you are trying to figure out how to do your own production and you want to figure out how do you level up into something professional, the explanations here are amazing. And there is a team that works on that constantly, and it is it blows my mind. I sometimes will just go in there and just like I just want to be smarter for today, and I'll just read some of the Netflix stuff, and the breakdowns that they have at almost every level of film production is truly amazing, and I would highly recommend perusing that webpage.
I will also say that standards are a moving target. I've been delivering
Which is why it's on a web page and not a book. Like it changes all the time. It changes.
Totally.
I would say that the Netflix changes as fast as it should. Like it doesn't. It's not. It's not. It doesn't take every whim that comes by and says, "Oh yeah, we'll put that in." So but it is a constantly moving target, as you said, and it is constantly. This is constantly updating, and it's a pretty amazing resource.
And my anecdote was that I've been delivering into Hulu for one of my clients for about 4 years now. And now Hulu's been absorbed by Disney Plus. And sure enough, the next time I used the same recipe and delivered into them, I got a failure. And I had to go back. And it's because they're increasing their standard requirements. And Disney has more rigid standards than Hulu did before Disney. So that's where this is coming from. Big companies, coming from small companies. You just have to be agile about this because it's changing real fast. Next question.
Robin Cutshaw from Atlanta, Georgia. Do you use an electronic to-do list, and a suggestion for one that shares between Mac and iOS?
CJ.
This wasn't always the case, but Apple Reminders has gotten a lot better for iOS. I mean, that's on the right here. It's got cross-platform, or it's not cross-platform, but cross-device syncing via iCloud. You can embed images. You can put in checklists. It's really, really nice. If you're finding yourself bumping up against the edges of that, a lot of folks, the next will graduate over to an app called Things from a company called Cultured Code. They've won a couple Apple Design Awards, and it's really beautifully designed. But it's going to get expensive. It's $10 for your iOS app, $50 for your Mac app, and then if you want an iPad app, it's another $20. So you're into it for $80 if you need all three. And at that level, you're getting into OmniFocus. OmniFocus is $75 for the regular, $150 for the Pro. That would be the next stone I would turn. And then honorable mention to Clear. Clear is a free app that is really beautifully designed, and for a simple to-do list app, I don't think you can ask for more.
Alex.
Yeah, I have an app that I use that it's pretty great. You can the app will allow you to put it on every computer, every Apple computer. So it's iOS, iPad OS. It works on my Mac. It works everywhere. In fact, I hear that they already have a release for it that's going to work on the Vision Pro that's there, and it lets you do to-do lists. It lets you keep notes. You can even draw in it and drop photos in. If you drop a photo in, it will actually identify what's in the photo. You can have it say, like, what is this plant, and drop it right in, and it'll figure it out. It's an amazing app, and it's called Notes. So anyway,
in iOS and Mac OS, it's everywhere on the Apple
it's
system.
Everywhere. The thing is,
really
as an
good.
Apple,
As
an Apple user, I always look at these to-do lists. I'm like, really? Because I take, like, for instance, if I'm going to the market, I'll send a notes list. And I just say, make this a checklist, and then I send it to my wife, and she'll sit there and update it and put things in. I just keep on looking at the notes. Now, there's some apps that do that really well for going shopping, but what I will say is that every meeting that I have with a client, I put at the very top, this is the client, this is the subject of the meeting, and this is the date, year, month, day, and the time. So I know I can relate it back to the meeting that I had in my iCal. So that's the first line, and I can see those, and then I just start writing whatever I want to write while I'm talking to them. But I can always find it. And I mean, I've been doing this for so long that there's a huge, world that I've, and I know that there's other apps that do it, and it's all the apps that CJ suggested are excellent. But I will say that for me, just knowing that I can just put it everywhere, and I live in a mostly, as most people know, a mostly Apple world. I do use PCs and Linux as appliances, but I don't really use them as a work product. So for me, having something that's just at the operating system makes a lot of sense.
Courtney.
I use Google Calendar because it is cross-platform, and you can create multiple calendars, and then I just turn on notifications. And so I'll get a notification either via email or via my Google Home sitting over my shoulder back here that will tell me I've got something coming up. So Google Calendar allows you to schedule your whole day and put anything that's pertinent in there for you. You can have multiple calendars on there, and you can share, like I have a work calendar and a personal calendar, and I'll share the work calendar with employees so they know what's going on at work every day without exposing my personal calendar to them. And so you can, each person can turn on notifications and have a notification show up on their phone. Or if they have a home assistant or something, it'll light up showing that there's something coming up. And you can tell it how far ahead of time you want to be notified, either via text message or via email. So it's very handy in that respect. It's cross-platform, works on everything, Android, iOS, PC and Mac.
CJ.
And it's free. Sorry.
The delineation for me is notes I look at almost as like a PKM or a personal knowledge manager, where this is my diary of everything that I've done and everything that I need to do and details that I need to be able to search and remember. When it's something where I need to be reminded at a time or need to be reminded at a location, that's when I'll graduate to those other things. But even though I mentioned all these to-do list apps, I personally don't thrive in to-do lists and task-focused things. I kind of look at more project-based stuff, so that's where I find myself leaning on notes a lot too.
Mitchell?
If you're a technical Luddite like I am, you use Outlook.
That's been around forever. And so lots of possibilities for you, Robin. Hope you got the answer you're looking for. Let's go to the next question.
Roscoe Jones from Madison, Indiana. Does each camera lens have its own unique properties that need to be replicated in Vision Pro for believable results?
Alex.
Absolutely. Yeah. So camera distortion is a big problem, and it's been something that we've been calculating for decades. So basically what happens is each lens, it's usually not, it can technically be that lens that has a problem for some of these high-end lenses, but typically it's a certain make of a lens is going to, it's not just that there's a field of view for it, it is that it is slightly bending everything, very, very slightly bending everything just a little bit, this camera distortion. And so what we do is we will put charts up in front of it to measure, these big grids that we use to measure what that distortion is. And there's two pieces of that. One is distortion. The other one, by the way, is chromatic aberration. And we see both of those things in these lenses. And so we're measuring for those things so that we can add them back to the CG objects. And one of the things that when you look at a lower budget film that doesn't have that and you think, oh, it doesn't look, it doesn't quite look right. A lot of that comes down to lens distortion, and there's a lot of other reasons for it. But lens distortion is part of that. You can't just put an object in there and expect it to match correctly if you don't calculate for that lens distortion. So it is really important, and it's kind of amazing that they're releasing it. The reason they're probably doing this is because, of course, virtual production is a big deal for them. And what's holding people back sometimes is they don't know how to do this lens distortion calculation. They have to do it for all of what they do. And so they're putting this out of something that they already had the water's under the bridge as far as what they spent money on. They had to do it for what they do, and they might as well release it, because in any company, what you'll look for is what's holding them back and not something that generates revenue for them. They're going to try to commoditize, and what makes them different, they're going to try to control. And in this case, what's holding them back is people not being able to do this well, so they're releasing it. I think it's a genius move.
Next question.
Next one in from Andy Korkendorfer from Viera, Florida. DJI launched modified 3D editing platform creating of models from flight data. Thoughts?
That's interesting. Alex, what do you think?
It's pretty amazing. So if you watch the video, what it shows is that you can have a bunch of cars. For instance, they showed this example where you have a bunch of cars on the ground, and you can select them and say flatten that, and then it flattens those cars. So what it's doing is it's calculating what's sticking out from the ground. So it says, I can see a plane that is the road, and I'm going to flatten the cars against it. And then it has 2D editing tools so that you can go in and remove all the cars and have it seamlessly, remove all of those things. And what this is great from DJI's perspective is being able to clean up a lot of drone shots so that you have kind of an empty space to look at without all the junk that was there in real time. And so I think it's pretty interesting. And we have these things in scanning already where we can remove all the trees and remove all the things. It can calculate these things. So it's not brand new, but it's really well implemented.
Next question.
Talalik Lopez Waterman in Sarasota, Florida. In the past, I've noticed on conversations with Tony Mobley that if I post a bunch of shorts on the same subject in a row, that only the first short gets a large number of views. Do you think this is a coincidence or because of the algorithm?
Alex?
I would keep on doing it or watching it. I mean, I'm just getting started, so I don't have an answer for that because I've been just loading them all up as one big chunk and going, hey, let's see what happens here. I have not found that it's the first one. Like, it is definitely ones that are random. I'm still calculating what is the thing that causes certain ones to take off. There was one that I thought was almost a throwaway from yesterday or from last week or whatever that I posted, or maybe it was yesterday, that I posted that took off and had 3,000 views. And there's a whole bunch of them that are sitting at 30 or 40 views, but it wasn't the order. For whatever reason, that one, hooked into the algorithm and took off. And so I don't think that it is, I don't think it's related to what order. I'm not even sure if it's related to how many. I think it's just what the algorithm grabs onto and thinks that is going to go somewhere. I did notice the one that did really well had a really short title. So I think that those, but I don't know, again, all of these things are, I have to, and again, I think that, we can help each other by going to some of these shorts and voting on them, because I think that it doesn't take very much for the algorithm to decide, I should give this to more people and see what they do. So please do that with ours and with Tony's.
How short was the title? Is it down to like the Billboard rules of 7 words? 3 words.
Yeah, it was like 3 words. A lot of them have been longer because I've been trying to put metadata into them. Hey, this is like one of the reasons I really wanted to get Strata out today was because Strata's doing a launch, so the bunch of people will be searching for it. So I wanted to have and I think that some of Michael's little clips were really useful, and I think it'll help them as well as us. And so I want to make sure that it was out there. And so we'll see what happens over the next couple of days.
Nice. Next question.
Chris Widener from Indianapolis, Indiana. Here's a question. Any chance of getting a big streamer on to talk about how they manage their live streams? Single person or minimal staff streams have some innovative tools for stream management. I'd love to hear about their use cases.
Alex.
Yeah, so I didn't quite single minimal staff have some.
So he just wants maybe us as
but it's a big
to have a
streamer
guest, somebody who does really big live streams.
The two things that don't match up there for me was that what I didn't quite understand is you say a big big streamer to talk about how they manage their live streams, a single person or minimal staff, because those two things don't generally go together. So if you're a big streamer, you have a team that's putting on those streams. If you're talking about Twitch, maybe. Gamers have a tendency to be kind of self-contained inside of OBS and do other things like that. If you're talking about most things that are streamed, if it's got a lot of viewers, it's also got a relatively large crew that's managing those things. It's not really a one person. As soon as it gets past gamers, it moves away from that really fast.
Interesting. All right. Courtney, you wanted to have a thought about this?
I was just going to say maybe somebody like Aaron Parecki, who does a live stream, a lot of stuff from his studio and does instructional stuff. It's not a super big stream, but he does live streams and he manages it all himself from his equipment there. So maybe they're talking about somebody like that.
Yeah.
Next question.
Zach Stallsmith from Chautauqua, New York. What are some pros and cons of running a BitFocus companion server on a Raspberry Pi 5?
I don't use any of this, and so no one has raised a hand on this. I think this might be one of the questions. You really want some good, deep, experiential knowledge here. Alex, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, the only thing I'd be concerned about is whether it's underpowered or not to manage that. I think the Raspberry Pi probably can manage that, but I think I'd be a little concerned about. I'd probably put a little bit more beef. I'd probably move up to a Melee to do that.
There you go. Let's go to the next question.
Jeff Veely from Henderson, Texas. What's your best guess on when the M3 chip will come to the Mac Studio?
Alex.
This year. That's my best guess. My best guess is this year it will be released. If I'm going to be more precise but less accurate, I would say June. June, the first week or second week of June is when you'll probably see the M3 come out on the Pro and the Studio. So I'm going to lay that out as a more precise shot, but a less accurate one. The most accurate one, but less precise, is a perfect lesson in precision versus accuracy. But the more accurate but less precise version is sometime this year. But I would say probably between the 1st and the 15th of June is the most likely time you're going to see an M3 for a Studio. And I'm not making anything up like I have inside information. It's when WWDC happens, and usually WWDC is where they've kind of they really have settled into showing Pro products.
Apple does have a reputation for being a little bit good at security of product announcements.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
a big deal for them.
Well, and if you know anybody there, no one wants to know. Like no one wants to know anything. Like because everything that's in your head is a liability. Yeah.
Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Many jurisdictions require venue employees to have a crowd management training, planning, and responding to emergencies in places of assembly. Anyone had experience with such a requirement?
Alex?
Yeah, it depends. There's more requirements in certain countries. Like Australia has very heavy requirements, probably the heaviest, but you also see them in a variety of European best practices and in the UK. The United States is a little less stringent about the requirements that everybody has to prove that they did the training and take a little quiz and do all those little bits and pieces. But it's definitely something that a lot of us pay attention to. You do want to know what your points of egress are. You do want to know how you're going to announce those things, and both for your crew and for the audience.
I used to do a 5,000 to 10,000 person live event, and I was chairman for a few years and had to run it. And we had to have paid security on site. We had to have paid police present, literally sworn officers badged on site. And we also had to have an EMS crew who was at the event. And so those things, in order to get our insurance certificates taken care of, were all criteria for doing a large in-person event.
Yeah.
So if you don't do this, talk to somebody who does do this and figure out what your legal responsibilities are.
And I do, just beyond legal responsibilities, do think about what you're going to do with your crew. I've worked on a lot of events where the security is pretty high, and we talk about where everybody should go. And usually we had a word, or a phrase that would go out. And that phrase, we would not share with anyone. I can say it now, but we don't use this word anymore. But if you heard on the comms, Super 6'4", Super 6'4", it meant everybody leaves. Like, you literally, there's a place that you go, and, but if you heard that over the comms, nobody says it, and it's a whispered, thing. But if you heard us say that over the comms, it meant drop what you're doing, don't ask what's happening, and this is the door you go out of. And usually our door was not where anybody else was going out of, because we were worried about a secondary impact. And so we would everyone was going we would find a different door, usually through the dock. And we would, but that was going to be, go quickly, out of those things. Fortunately, we never needed to use it, but we told people of what that was going to mean every single show that was at that level.
Courtney?
Yeah, in public venues, and even in a lot of production situations where you're just shooting on stage without the public present, a lot of the unions require a fire safety officer to be employed, be there for the entire production's run of the production. Sometimes venues will have a fire marshal that will show up once your production is in and set up right before the audience comes in, and will point out problems with ingress and egress of, like, cables running across pathways of exits and so on, to make sure you're abiding by the rules. But usually those on productions, usually the fire safety officer is just a retired fireman or fireperson, and they get paid a large sum of money, and a lot of people resent the fact that they have to hire one and have him standing around, unfortunately. But it's for the health and safety of your crew.
Let's go to the next question real quick.
It's from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. I've got an NVIDIA card that sends video signals to my monitors, but is not seen in Device Manager, and the NVIDIA control says there is no card installed. There may be a power issue with the PCIe slot. Has anyone else seen this happen?
Mitchell?
Well, you're obviously talking Windows here, because you're saying the words Device Manager. If it doesn't show up in the Device Manager, nothing's going to work. So the best thing I would do would be to go to the NVIDIA site and make sure you have the latest drivers installed on your PC. That's about all you can do. And as far as the car could be bad, and I don't think that it needs the power assist in order to be seen in the system. So I would go with the drivers first.
Courtney?
Yeah, I was wondering how it sends video signals to your monitors, but is not seen in the Device Manager. If it's not seen in the Device Manager, it shouldn't be sending any signals to your monitors right then. So I'm not sure how that's going on. But as Mitch said, just make sure that you've got the right drivers loaded and that Windows recognizes it in the Device Manager. Refresh your Device Manager, replug the card in, see if you can get it to show up, and go check the BIOS, because sometimes it'll default to the internal, on-chip video generator as opposed to an external video card, and that may be set in the BIOS.
We have just enough time maybe to sneak in a quick answer to the next one, so let's go to one more.
It's from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. PBS has posted its standards for generative AI that includes accuracy, transparency, and inclusiveness. Is this deserving of a deeper discussion?
I'm sure it is. Alex, what's your thought?
We're going to keep talking about it. It's something that we're going to be discussing a lot. So definitely, I think that it definitely deserves us to keep on paying attention to it. But I think it fits into an overall view that we should have around, what we trust in general when we watch the news and when we watch something online.
Yeah, we've always talked about this, and I'm sure we will continue to talk about this as time goes on. All right, getting ready for our transition to the second hour. A couple of announcements. The Isadora Lab with L. Wilson Spiro happens 10 a.m. today, 1 hour after we're finished here. An incredible opportunity to learn about Isadora for your own projects. Right after that lab, so at 11 o'clock, Oliver Breidenbach is going to be chatting with Alex about Mimo Live in After Hours, so you want to get on to that if you're interested in Mimo Live. There's a new panel panelist meeting Saturday, day after tomorrow. So if you're interested in becoming a panelist at Office Hours, this is the place for you to go and check it out. We're also looking for volunteers. If you're interested in NAB, there will be an NAB link in Discord under Alex's announcements for that. That's coming up really quickly here. We're interested in looking for panelists to be volunteers. We're now also publishing YouTube Shorts, as Alex mentioned earlier. So go look for the Office Hours shelf. Look to vote on those. We're really interested in what you're most curious about and how that affects things. Tomorrow also, there is going to be a chance to get on the email list. I'm running out of time, so we'll be right back in just a second. Welcome back to Office Hours and today's second hour. You know, when I started in this business decades ago, color manipulation was something only done in high-end facilities. You fast forward today, and it's become something nearly every content maker has to contend with, at least at a very basic level. And that's going to be our focus for today, because this is a very visual part of every production. I'm going to go through a few very basics about how I approach color in my own projects. I'm also going to start with a couple of minutes on how I've come to view color manipulation in the modern era. It doesn't mean the approach I take is the only one, but it'll give you at least a basic kind of generic idea of how this kind of thing works. The first thing I wanted to talk about was people, because for me, if I'm approaching a project, the single most important thing that I see are the human beings that appear in your video. If they look wrong for any reason, you have to make them look right, even in the earliest days. I've had footage come in from the field that it didn't match and different cameras looked bad. And if you don't at least get the basics done, then people can see that and there's something goofy about that. One of the things I learned really early is that the light that the camera sees is going to affect color balance of things. So you've got a couple of pictures here. Obviously, the color balance is very different. One of them looks more natural, at least compared to the top photo, than the other one. So the other one, the one that looks a little more golden, a little more warm, might have been shot with a camera set for daylight balance and it was lit by tungsten or something like that. These kind of things can happen a lot, but you have to be careful because sometimes that same idea of something that looks a little different than you think it should be is actually something that the director wants to see there. Here's a shot from the current very popular movie Poor Things, and you can see that the director and the producers and everybody have decided they want a specific look that looks more like the first example, which was wrong in terms of color balance for nature out in the field, but is exactly right for what the director wants to make happen in this. Let's talk about a couple of color correction tools that we'll be talking about today. The first, LUTs. LUTs are an important part of this. They are a mathematical transform that takes what's coming out of the camera, particularly if you shot in RAW, and gives it kind of a quick base grade to get you more what you're looking for. Another tool we're talking about here, I'm sure, is scopes. This is a tool that lets you rationally see exactly what your color looks like. This particular one is a vector scope, and anybody who knows how to read these knows that this is a shot of a color bar grid. And when a color bar is shown on a vector scope, those little bright spots hit exactly in the middle of targets. So that's one of the kinds of tools color correctors use. But at the bottom line of everything is the human eye. And a trained human eye, somebody who understands how to do color correction, is always, for everybody I've ever talked to, the ultimate determinant of whether or not your color grading is working for you. Just a couple of suggestions. The first thing, I've always approached this as an editor, I just want a decent base grade. I want the first light look to be something that doesn't distract anybody who's going to be judging what I'm working on. The next thing I do after that is I try to figure out what is my editorial color for me as an editor so that I can look at the shots that are coming in and at least see what's going on. I'm hoping you can see that in that little 2 shot at the bottom, the first one is kind of what comes out of the camera. And as an editor, I'm going, can I really see the expressions? Can I really see what the character is supposed to be emoting? And if I can't, it behooves me to get that shot pulled up out of too much darkness so that at least I can make good judgments about performance and things like that. And then the last stage in this process is looks and delivery color, which can be a whole different thing. This is where artists get involved. Before this, we've been talking about the process of just making it work on set and to get what you need into the camera. Eventually, hopefully, you're going to go to somebody like Charles, who has just showed up on the panel. Great to see you, Charles. I'm going to turn it over to here in just a second to give a couple of thoughts about where color is right now.
TJ has some stuff to show in
and
Resolve
TJ has stuff as well. Excellent.
We'll go to CJ next.
All right, so let's do that. Let's dive out of my quick overview. And Charles, good to see you again. I just wanted to say hello because we haven't seen you in a while. We always look forward to seeing you when you get here.
Hey, cheers. It's good to be back. This should be fun.
Excellent. All right. So CJ has put together some stuff for today, so I'm gonna head it in his direction. CJ, take over.
Yeah, thanks very much. What I'm going to be focusing on today is kind of the first step that Bill talked about, just getting around some of the basics of Resolve and really the color correction part. That's getting a balanced first image across multiple shots that within the same scene that need to cut together. Once they're all at a baseline, that's when you can start to apply those creative looks and get to more of the narrative vision as opposed to, and that's color grading. To me, color correction is more of a technical job. We're actually just doing the balancing. So what I was able to bring up here is here is my Resolve window. So I've loaded some footage in that was shot, just some second unit footage that was grabbed on an early morning in Florence, Italy. I thought if we're going to be doing Da Vinci, we should be in Florence. And but the footage it's C300 footage from about 10 years ago. So this was not shot in log. So we're starting already with a little bit of a compressed color space. But I might be trying to intercut this with log footage. So the first thing that I do is I start to build a node tree where I'm getting all of my different footage into a color space. Before I dive into that, I just want to point out the main areas that I'm going to be working today. On the left here, this is where I have my viewer where I'm seeing the grade that I'm doing. This box here is my node tree. That's where I'm doing all of my individual grades. And then I'm paying particular attention every single time I touch something to the scopes. My vector scope here that's telling me color, my parade and my waveform, which is just giving me overall levels, and then the histogram. And finally, down here in the bottom left is where I'm going to be touching my primary color wheels. That's what's going to allow me to adjust for exposure and for color balance to get all of these shots so they would cut together. I did mention the first and the last thing that I'm doing in any of these shots when I'm building a node tree is I'm actually using a color space transform to get it from where it was shot to where I'm going to be working. Now, if it's already in Rec 709, why am I taking it from Rec 709 to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate only to, at the end, go back to Rec 709? Well, that's because the DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate are working color spaces. If I'm trying to intercut this with footage that was shot in log, I want to make sure that all of my grades as I'm going between the different shots are working within a similar color space. So right off the bat, first thing I'm going to do is look at exposure. Down here at the bottom, 0 is absolute black, 100 is absolute white. So generally, the first thing that I'm doing is trying to make sure something's exposed correctly. Patience is appreciated. I normally work with a DaVinci Resolve micro panel, but for the sake of showing you all, I made my mouse really big so we could follow along. But I'm just going to grab my gain and bring this up a little bit. And then I notice that my blacks are a little crushed, so we might adjust that later. And again, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm bringing what should be white up near 100, and then I'm bringing my shadows down. Bring my shadows down to what should be 0. One thing that if you're moving too quickly, you can easily start making adjustments not in the appropriate node. So if I have this color space transform node, I shouldn't be doing anything else there. The reason that we try to stay organized this way is we're going in and out of projects over multiple days and multiple weeks. It's easy to forget what you did where. So whenever I'm adjusting this exposure, I want to make sure that I'm adjusting that within my exposure node. So the gain here is what's touching my high end, the lift to touch my low end, and then the gamma, that's my midtones. And as I move that up and down, it's going to affect the contrast of the shot. And as a shot gets more contrast and I bring that gamma down, the saturation's also going to pop a little bit more. The last thing that I wanted to mention that is a strategy that everybody should use when you're cutting multiple shots within a scene. Like if you have a shot reverse shot, every single time you have a lighting condition, every single time you have a camera angle, Resolve has this great ability to take two clips and add those clips into a group. And then that allows you to make a group level adjustment so that all of the different so that all the exposure and the color adjustments that are going to be a baseline applied to the whole entire scene are done consistently from shot to shot. In this particular case, it's a single shot that there is just happened to be a cut towards the end. It's a sloppy edit. But if there's all of a sudden a big flash right here when these cut from one to the other, it's going to be pretty jarring. And ultimately, the job of color correction and color grading is to be invisible. I don't want people to know that I'm here. I just want people to know that it looks good. The second somebody says, "Oh, what did they do with the color there?" I think I've lost the ball game. So I'll just do this one last time. I'm not going to go through every single shot. So let me go and grab my shadows, grab the highlights. I actually, of all of the shots that I had, I like the white balance of this one, but I noticed that when I bring the subject of these folks walking in this taxi cab up to where they're where I want them to be in my scopes and look good to my eye, I've really lost a lot of the detail here. And one button that I find really useful that not a lot of people do is in your primary wheels, you can actually go from a regular color wheel to a log wheel, and that's going to give you a more targeted approach. So if I move my highlights up and down on a log wheel, you'll notice that only the highlights are being affected. It's a lot like when you're in Lightroom or Photos and you make a shadow adjustment or a highlight adjustment. If you overdo it, you can have a overly compressed image, and when you get a big flat line like that, I'm clipping artificially. So I don't want to take all the shape out of that scope. I'm just trying to bring back some of the shape of the clouds and that reflection. If I do that same exact edit over here in primaries, it's affecting a lot more than just those highlights, and maybe it's not what I want. The last kind of intro tool that I wanted to highlight, though, was taking advantage of your gallery. If this is the overall look that I want for my scene, right off the bat, this shot is too yellow, this shot is too blue, this shot is too blue. So I'm going to grab this, say this is my hero frame, grab that still, and then right-click on it over here and hit play still. And now, as I go over to the other shots, I can move this back and forth and see how the scopes react. And this is where I'm going to rely on my vector scope. Just based on the angle of that vector scope, I can see that if I move my temperature slider, and I'll go over to balance to move my temperature slider, watch as I move this to cool and to warm, how that vector scope reacts. I'm not even looking at the image to start when I do this. I'm just looking at that scope, and you can see it get more orange and more blue. What I had in my gallery still is fixed. So now if I make those overlap, right about there, now those two shots are going to cut better together, and I've got myself to a nice baseline. The other thing that I do a lot just to keep sanity, because your eyes will lie to you, even when the scopes will not, your eyes will lie to you. So besides having 6500K bias light in the room so that my eyes have a consistent white point, the other thing I find myself doing a lot is there's a button on my Resolve micro panel that is disable grade, or you can hit Command D on the Mac. Command D will show me will disable just the node that I'm on. So there is my grading adjustment there. Same thing with this shot. If I look at my vector scope, I'm going to hop over to my balance node, move that warmer and cooler, and now this one is cutting together more nicely. So without having too heavy of a hand, I can really start to make those cuts more seamless, because not every piece of footage that you get is going to be perfectly shot. Not every piece of footage is going to have a gray card or have a color checker that you can balance to. And really, all of those technical tools are great, but how it looks and how it feels is the ultimate master of all these things. You need to make sure that your cuts aren't jarring and that everything feels natural as you're going through. And you can get into tremendously more complex node trees, but in terms of just a quick demo, this is the big things to focus on. Watch your scopes when you're touching anything. When I'm touching the gain, I'm watching how those colors move around. Like, for example, I'll give you one more color balance because I was playing with this last night and I really liked what it did. Oh, I noticed I didn't build my node tree here. So I'm going to copy the node tree and all of the grades just by copying and pasting. And then, but I don't want all those individual adjustments I made. I still want my color space transform on the in and on the out. I'll just right click in here, reset my node grades there and there to keep that consistent. I'm going to do a quick exposure, bring those shadows down, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the balance. I want these to be of a similar temperature, so I'm going to move that a little bit. And I really like what's done in this alley here with the reflected light, but now my sky is way off. It's all over the place. So I'm actually going to pop it back into I'll make another node. So I can right click and hit add serial node. And all that's going to do is add one more step in sequence to my color correction. So this node, think of it, it's first in, first out. So this feeds this, feeds this. You can make parallel nodes as well if you want multiple nodes to affect at the same time. But whatever I'm doing here as a baseline is starting at the node before it. And if I go back into log and bring those highlights down a little bit, I can actually see that the sky isn't balanced, right? If I'm reading this waveform scope, I can see left to right in the image is represented on screen by how bright the things are. And because I have three separate lines here, my blue, my green, and my red channels aren't in balance and aren't white. And because the reds are so much higher than the blues, that's why I get this big yellow cast over here. So now if I take my highlight slider, and this is why I use a trackball, because I find that I need to understand, okay, if I need to bring the reds down, I'm going to pull it away from the reds and towards the blue. Remember, color is all relative. So as you're lowering the reds, you're increasing the blues. And ultimately, once I make these highlights line up, if I just move this highlight slider in a little bit, so now I've got them pretty well balanced. And I'm not even looking at the image here. I'm looking at the scopes. I get the scopes to where I think they look good, and then I look back at the image and say, okay, does that make sense? And as you do that over and over again, slowly you get to the point where you really get scary good at being able to utilize those scopes. So now I've fixed that yellow cast that was here in my sky, but I still have this beautiful light down here in the alley. So now as I cut this together, I will take my highlight away. Now, and as these shots are cutting against one another, I didn't do that one. But now as these shots are cutting against one another, they look a little better. Except now that I'm going through this one again, I was like, man, that one's too warm. Maybe I'll replay my still. But it's one of those processes that after you think you get where you need and you're happy with your image, it pays dividends to walk away, go outside, take a walk, take a breather, come back to it, and then try to look at it with fresh eyes and say, okay, what does this look like to me as new? And then is there anything that's jarring and what do I need to adjust? So that's just that's a real low level, just here's how one approach to color balancing. It's not the only approach, but that's doing a color space transform, building a node tree, reading your scopes, and playing with some of those rudimentary tools.
Great job. Thank you. I think as everybody who is watching this, if you haven't done much color correction or balancing or even base grading on footage coming in, you're starting to see how complex this can be and how much time and effort it takes to become really good at this. It is time well spent because we're seeing more and more good quality footage out there. And remember, as you do projects, everything you do is going to be compared against the standards that people are watching in content on the web and in TV and in the movies and every place else. So understanding these basics is very important. Alex, your turn.
Yeah, no, I think that the great work, CJ. Like, thank you so much for putting that together. I think it's really important. One of the things that CJ and I had talked about before the show was the need to just see the basic process. Like this is how we kind of approach this situation as we start to put that together. And so that's a really good overview of how to get into Resolve. And CJ had a lot more complicated things to do, and I was like, just keep it simple. Just one thing after another. Just we just want to make sure that if someone watches that video, they know at least where to start working with those nodes. And I will say that anytime I don't know if anyone else on the panel does it in any other way, but I will say that anytime I need precision color, Resolve is where we typically go to make that happen. We also have Charles Klein here, and I don't know if Charles wants to add any notes from things that he saw there.
What's up, Charles?
Hello, guys. No, I think CJ did a great job. It is a very technical and long process to try and get, especially when you get a lot of different types of footage and you're trying to get everything to work cohesively. So not only when you're looking at a still, but when it plays out, what's the relationship? What's the visual rhythm of these things playing together? And sometimes you'll find that what looked good in the still, once you play it down, it might not work as well with the previous or next shot, right? So there's the work of going back and forth. As CJ said, you have to get that feel so that it works as a cohesive thing so that you don't recognize that there was a colorist involved. It's just a story that you're now becoming a part of.
Yeah, there's also, in different parts of the production process, as you're going through your workflow, you don't need to be perfect in the early stages often. I find just acceptable. And I mentioned, what my goal is for showing rough cuts to clients is just there's nothing overtly wrong that they can get stuck in. And instead of talking about what I want them to talk in, which is usually about whether the piece is effective, am I communicating correctly? If they get stuck with an hour's discussion about why that shot didn't look right, I'm off course and I'm not doing my best for them. If I can get everything acceptable, I know, because I'm not a colorist, I'm an editor, that eventually everything I touch on these is often going to be extracted if it goes to somebody like Charles, and they're going to be starting over from scratch and doing serious color work in serious color tools if that's the kind of project I'm working on and if it's going to go to a large audience. Sometimes I know just enough to be not so dangerous that for a corporate piece, the limited skills I have are enough to get it done, because not every project is going to go and be seen by a million eyeballs. But you certainly want to understand how this works so that at the basic level you can know what are the basics I should get right at my level, and when is it going to get beyond me? And if I really want superb results, I need to call in a CJ or a Charles and get my hands off of it, because I'm not really that skilled. CJ, you had another comment to make?
And the other thing to keep in mind is that once you get a baseline comfort level in Resolve, you don't have to get into a super complex node tree with parallel nodes and mixers. And if you get just as a starting point, hey, what was my camera's when my camera shot like Blackmagic RAW Film Gen 5, when that gets converted over to the output color space, Rec 709 or Rec 2020, that's going to get you at a really good starting place that then you can work backwards and work on the individual shots and get them there. The footage that I was using here wasn't shot in log, and I know that you don't always have a choice, right? If you're just on the finishing end of things, you kind of get whatever gets thrown at you, and it's your job to make it look good. But if you're the one who's creating, if you're the creator and you are shooting the footage and you're comfortable with just some of the basic tools, then you can start to take advantage of the log footage or the raw footage out of your camera. It's just like when if you're recording audio and you're recording 32-bit float, it's because you want to be able to, or you're shooting raw photography, you want to be able to bring back those highlights, bring back those peaks, and not get a bunch of digital noise and clipping. So getting comfortable with these tools opens up a ton of opportunity for you to make really good looking stuff.
Yeah, we also haven't talked about the fact that, this has been around for such a long time, and most of the NLEs now have the ability to work with various LUTs. And so if you're working on a camera A, whatever that is, Blackmagic camera, Arri camera, whatever, there could well be a LUT that has been pre-built that you can just toss on the raw footage from there, and it'll get you pretty close. That is not fully graded, but it's going to help you get from something that's unwatchable to something watchable. Now, if somebody brings a different camera shot or a different thing in, tossing that same LUT designed for camera A onto camera B is not going to get you where you want to go.
And that's where those the color space transforms become so valuable, because if you have, hey, I'm starting with Arri footage and I'm in this shot, and this, the B camera was a red and the C camera was Blackmagic, Getting all three of those into that DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate means that all of your adjustments are working in the same space, and they're going to be consistent across the different cameras. And then at the end, you color space transform them back into whatever your delivery format is. So DaVinci is really powerful in its ability to translate all of those disparate inputs into a standard that then you can make look good and then have good results on the out.
Charles, you wanted to comment?
Yeah. So if you're working on a production, and usually if it's a large production, you usually have a camera, a master camera. You might have like a B camera for B-roll. But on other productions, you might have a lot of different cameras you have to join in. And knowing what was captured, since everything passed the sensor, you're just applying math to the image. Like past the debayer, you're applying math. So really knowing where you're starting from and trying to get everything into a cohesive color space, as CJ said, is the first thing you should be doing if you're working with different cams and footage. It's where things can fall apart very quickly if you don't get that base substructure down into your working pipeline. That's the first thing you should be doing.
And would you
now
say
your inserts are coming in over iPhone, right? The iPhone 15 is now your insert camera with their log.
Well, and to that point, there are tools like
Yes.
Media Info and others that you can drop a shot on and at least give you the basic metadata that's being carried by that shot, so you know where that shot's starting. Alex, you had a note?
Well, and I guess would you say, and this is for CJ or Charles, the per shot is getting all the shots into the same place, like getting, the per shot corrections, get them all into the same place. And then the grouped shots is kind of like, this is a scene that I want it to look like a certain thing. And then the overall is the overall show. This is what I want it to feel like. But you're kind of like, but the first step with the shots is not really as much getting them exactly what you want, but really getting them all to look the same.
Like a baseline. I kind of look at it like a sandwich. And then what I like about the group clips, I've brought in a different node tree now that's a little over the top. But what you have here on your group pre-clip, this is adjustments that are made to the entire group before the per clip grade. So this is where I can get my color space transform in. I don't know if I do the CST out there, but I get my color space transform in. I get my exposure correction and my balance correction, and that's going to be if I have a similar lighting condition across the entire group, this is going to get them to a baseline. Then I can get into all the individual clip stuff. And then there's another layer, group post clip. And group post clip is where you can do those per scene grades to move them up and down. So it's and then at the very end, you have your timeline level grades, where whatever you put on this. So if your entire show was in a single color space or shot with a single camera, you could do your color space transform here at the timeline level, or your LUT here at the timeline level. So it was applied to everything across the board. But the grouping your shots is you have a lot of flexibility in how you can go about it, but it's an incredibly powerful tool.
One of the things that CJ put together, actually, and Charles, you may actually like this, that you may not have seen it, is this processor that he wrote with the help of was it ChatGPT, CJ?
Yeah, ChatGPT.
But what it does is you can take a whole project, throw it into Resolve, and just say, give me the middle frame of every shot in this project, whether it's a whole feature film or it's an individual one, and make a poster out of it. So here's a picture for each one of them. And what is, when you talk about these individual shots versus the group shots versus the overall shots, what you can see is in given scenes what the colorist or the DP or a mixture of both have made decisions about of how this is going to look. But it's scene by scene. You'll see these and I think that the most obvious one is the Matrix, where you don't notice when you're watching the movie, but everything's a little green when you're in the Matrix, and everything is warm when you're out of the Matrix. And you can see that very clearly on a poster, a poster of every frame. You immediately see these trends that go through the entire process. But that's kind of a great example of using color to tell a story.
So we have some questions piling up. So Mitch, what do we got?
We're kicking it off with Dave Troutman from Edmonton, Canada, asking, can someone elaborate on the relationship between color and mood in dramas, and how are these established?
Alex, start us off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times, we don't think about how much color makes a difference, and it really does inform us. We make a lot of decisions about whether they're cool or warm, what the colors are in the scene, but also the overall feel of the scene definitely is affected by the overall color. So you may decide you want and what's really interesting about color is that, like environmental sounds, color lives kind of in your subconscious, in your lower brain, which in some cases makes it even more powerful than what you're listening to. So instead of and things that work in your subconscious or in your kind of a lower brain operation often have more impact on the person than the things that are happening on the surface, and they don't even see them happening. And so as we go into those colors back and forth, we're really affecting something that they don't even have access to in real time as a viewer. And so I think that that's what makes it super powerful.
Charles?
And one other thing that you have to take into account is that mood will slightly shift the color based on the culture and the region of the world that you are grading for. Like what will work for a European audience might not work in Asia. So that's another level that you have to consider, how they wish to be perceived in the mood that you're trying to portray, but how are their skin tones being perceived? And that's a very big thing more in the beauty and in the drama world, where you really have to take into account what are the final deliverables. If it's going to be in the States, is it going to be in Europe, in Asia, in South Africa? Those things tend to come into play.
Yeah, and as on the example that I popped up earlier, here's the bigger thing. The director here knew they were talking about a period piece, and the light would not have been tungsten or would not have been something cold like it is now. This was probably gas-lit, these scenes. So the DP and the production designer understood that when they were in these environments, the light needed to look one way. When they were outside in other environments, the light needed to look another way, because that's what we see in the real world. In an office full of fluorescent lights, we've all been in those offices, and we know how they kind of look. And if you're completely out of the range, if you're lighting your character, with a tungsten fixture in a fluorescently lit scene, that's going to stand out. They're going to be a different color than anything in the environment around them, and it's going to look false, just as simple as that. CJ, more thoughts?
And just to show the example that Alex was talking about, when I ran that movie through this Lua script that would grab the middle frame and export them out as PNGs, to see how the mood of that changed. I can show this, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So right here's the beginning of that film is in darkness. When we're in the Matrix, we're really green, and it's a little uncomfortable, almost like fluorescent light. Then we get out, and now we're in this blue tone. When he meets Morpheus for the first time, it looks like the "I'm a Mac, I'm a PC" ads of later. When they're in the dojo, it has more of a almost a sepia haze over it. So each one of those scenes is a completely different mood, and it helps not only drive the viewer's sense of emotion, but also their sense of space. There's no question that you've entered somewhere new, you've gone somewhere, and that's, to me, is more powerful than.
And you can also see the consistency between the shots. You're seeing these flows almost like layers in a if you cut sediment, there are these layers that have been put down here. And I've seen these posters in the past, and I have to admit I was asking for this as a feature for maybe the last 5 years from Blackmagic, and CJ put it together on his own. It is so powerful to see the flow of how a colorist puts how this gets done on a show by show basis. It's really, really interesting.
Let's go to the next question.
Mickey Makachor from Manila, Philippines. What is your preferred working color space and why?
Alex, start us off.
I'll defer to Charles.
Charles, start us off.
So the working color space will affect the way that your tools will interact with you. So that's something you have to keep in mind. I tend to like to work in Log C3 from Arri because I like the way that my tools and my settings will interact with me as I'm working the knobs and twisting saturation, trying to find the right exposure. I like that works. I like the bigger color spaces, but also remember 90 to 80% of your image will still live inside of Rec 709 for the most part. right? You'll use things that go outside of that to help the story come alive and push along. But most of your image is still relatively in a small world. But for me, I like the way that Log C3 works. It's nice and smooth, especially my tools. And I've set all my parameters for my tools to actually work in that way. So they're very subtle the way that they work.
And
Mitchell,
so
yeah.
I just want to
go
ask
ahead,
one
Alex.
thing there, Charles. So you're basically saying, I'm going to do everything in Log C3, and then you're going to, is it your last thing is to put it out to where it needs to go?
Yes. Yes. So I will work and push and adjust, but I'll be looking through a LUT or a display transform that's going to show to all my monitors. Right? So I have this monitor, I have my big monitor up there, and I'll have that displayed. But the work being done behind the scenes, if I'm working in Resolve, or if it's in Baselight or Mystica or Flame or Luster, that's my working space because I like the way that it is working the math. Because remember, after the sensor, it's just applying math. But each color space has a different way to apply that math. So you have to understand that. And for me, I like the way that Arilog C3 tends to work. It's very smooth, it's consistent, and it's easier for me to find a happy place.
So that's your grading mezzanine format, essentially. Get everything into that. You can work in that and feel like you really have control over what you're doing. And then you know that at the target codec later is a whole different thing.
Yes. Now, if you're working on a larger production and the team wants you to work in Red or DaVinci Wet Gamut, or if you're going to work, in anything else, that needs to be taken into account. But if I'm doing the whole production by myself, or if the team agrees, that's where I will work in.
Makes sense. Mitchell, you had a thought.
I've got a question for Charles that relates to this. Is if you're using your basic startup as Rec 709, and I shot something with an ARRI camera, wouldn't I use the ARRI 709? And is there a difference between them?
If you already shot in 709, like you've constrained the image a lot, so you have less wiggle room. If you shot in log or raw,
this is in post, so I've already shot it in ARRI log or raw. And in post, I'm trying to decide, what am I going to look at? Am I going to look at their version or somebody else's version?
Yeah, so each manufacturer is making a decision about what data they want to keep going from scene referred to display referred, right? Because you have a 20-pound bag, but display referred, it's a much smaller bag, right? So each manufacturer, whether it's ARRI or Blackmagic or Red or Sony, they're all making a decision about what data to keep, what to get rid of, and how to take this XY coordinate of a pixel to this place, right? So it's very particular. And you can, if you get into the color science of things, you can start to play. I don't suggest this by any means. But
it's a possibility.
But if you have a team of color scientists that you can work with, you can mix some things and say, okay, I like what this is doing. I don't like what this is doing. I want to get rid of this and make it do something else. So you can mix and match. But if you're just starting off, use the recommended LUT from the manufacturer. It's what they intend as your display referred, right? And then work under that to your eye is happy with the image. But definitely start there.
CJ, you have a thought?
Yeah, and for me, it's making sure that I'm making that transform from the ARRI log to my output color space of Rec 709 or what have you after I've done all my work. I don't want all of my nodes that I'm using to work with the shot and manipulate it to be working in a compressed space. I want them to have as much data as possible. And then at the end of the process, if I worked the whole project in that ARRI log, that's when I do my ARRI to 709 conversion. I put that node in right at the beginning so that I can be mindful of the output image, but I just need to make sure that it's after all the nodes that I'm working in between.
Very important point. I'm finding that more and more that it's not only what I do, but where I do it in a workflow has a big impact on whether things get easier or harder going forward. That's reinforced to me a lot these days. Let's go to the next question.
And it's from Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. What are some common mistakes beginners make when learning color grading?
CJ, start us off.
Finding the node structure that works best for you, to me, is a place where a lot of people get stumbled up because a lot of people, when they first start, they want to do too much within a single node. And then as they get more and more complex, they find it difficult to back things out. I'm more of taking the approach of where I'm going to make adjustments on individual nodes because I can make them, as many as I want. And then I can, if I want to say, well, what if I took out that temperature changer? What if I took out that qualifier? What if I'm able to isolate all of those things? But the other mistake that happens is people make way too many nodes. And now all of a sudden you get lost every time you go from shot to shot, or it becomes cumbersome to continually switch around nodes every time. And then you forget as you're working a really long day, and now, your node structure is all there and they're all labeled, but that's not where the edits are made.
Charles, thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I have a node tree that is fairly large for, let's say, beauty work, because that involves a lot of keys and mats and everything. But for film work, it's much smaller, but I like to have a designated node tree just so I know I don't have to think about if I'm doing a key or some saturation. I have a right node that's going to be just doing that, and all the nodes are labeled. So I know if I need to look at this in 6 months again because they're doing a revamp of it, I know exactly where to go when they want to make a change. Now, the mistakes that I see a lot of people now, because Resolve has made the cost of entry to do color work essentially free, right? When most of us started in post-production to have a Resolve room, you needed to spend $500,000 just to get it up and running, and it went up from there. So one of the first things that I see people doing is buying LUTs from random sites where they don't exactly explain to you what this LUT is expecting and where it's going to. Or a YouTube video that says, oh, get the Joker look. You might be able to get that Joker look on one clip, but you have to realize the pre-process to make the Joker look the way that it did happened way before they started shooting. There was a CDL developed. It was a LUT, particular LUT for the film, and the entire pipeline of the color was set before they even started shooting. So they knew what they were going to get. So understanding that you can get a look for one clip, but if you're doing a commercial, the uphill battle that you're going to be encountering trying to get everything to look that way, it's let's say insurmountable to to some extent. So understanding where you're starting and where you're going is basically the first thing that you need to figure out as you're getting started. And it's going to take some time to understand color and theory, since most people now are not starting in a facility where you get to see the entire pipeline. They're just seeing the end result of, I can make a cool image, not what it takes to make an entire commercial or feature film. So understanding that goes a long way.
CJ?
Make sure you start with a really good foundation of understanding of where you're coming from and where you're trying to go. So those initial project setup settings are really easy to overlook when you're just dragging clips into Resolve and you're starting the edit in Resolve and just moving right to the color page. Sometimes you can cause yourself a lot of heartache if you had settings that were off at the beginning. But the other thing to mention is, if you are round tripping from Premiere or from Final Cut into Resolve and then going back for the online, you've got to make sure that you understand that process and do it successfully before you do all the color work. Like, make sure that you're comfortable with that round trip before you start going, because the last thing you want to do is you've got all this complicated stuff that's sitting on top of a foundation that's sandy.
We've seen that before. What have I gotten from these people? Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, what's a useful resource for learning the basics of color management for someone coming from an audio background?
Alex, what do you find?
There's some great YouTube solutions, and Charles and CJ, I'm sure, have some probably some suggestions of where they like to go. I will say that the Blackmagic training that is free that they do is probably the best first step. Like, it is a very thorough, long, it's 3 or 4 days, I think, is their first training. And I think that they've gotten really good at this, and I think that's the place that I would recommend most people starting.
Charles.
I second everything that Alex said. That is the best place that they've been able to just go and open up the floodgates and essentially have a system where they can sit you down for a couple of days and actually get certified at the end of it, if you pass the test, of course. But they have great free training. It's going on all throughout the year, and it's in multiple languages. And so there are some in Spanish and English
and Portuguese. I don't know why the Portuguese. I was like, Portuguese. There's a lot of people that speak Portuguese. I mean, Brazil's a big place as well as Portugal, but it's just a funny, like, Portuguese. So it means that they have a Portuguese trainer. so anyway, the one thing I will say is that the certification, like, I don't really care about the paper. Like, people like, and so the thing is it's great training, and the certification tells you, well, you're ready to, it's kind of. A lot of people talk about black belts. Black belt, when you become a black belt, they'll tell you that that's when you're starting to train. Like, that's, you just prove that you could get there. And so you're not a useful martial artist yet. You're just you're just ready to be trained. And so I think that you want to look at taking that course. And then the most important thing is to go out and shoot. Shoot, correct things, put little things together, but shoot it in. And I would recommend log, so that you can't get away with anything. You go out and shoot and have to actually correct it to somewhere. And the best thing right now is, for those of you who have iPhones, is that you can shoot 422 log with aces and everything else on your phone, so that you don't need to have a big camera to go out and do some of this stuff. But you want to go out and shoot little stories or do other things that require you. And I wouldn't do big projects. I would do lots of little projects that are home projects or things you're going to put on YouTube or just things for yourself. But force yourself to, to do lots of these little shorts. I was doing, for me to get up to, to whatever level I know Resolve, which is nothing near CJ or Charles. I was doing TikToks with my kids, but I was shooting them in 6K RAW and doing the corrections, as I went through that, to kind of figure, to play with those tools and then outputting them from there.
CJ?
I'm going to second and third about the Blackmagic training materials. Besides taking the actual courses, there's also like the DaVinci Resolve Beginner's Guide that is 470 pages long, is a free PDF that is just readily available on the internet. And what I love about having the PDF local on my machine is that I open it up and I search for stuff. When I have a feature that I don't understand or that I need to learn more about, I just go up to the search bar and all of a sudden all the pages highlight. And it's really in depth. It's really easy to digest. Understanding the best solutions also means understanding the red flags that are out there. If you see the YouTube video that's 8 minutes long that says this is the one node tree or the one thing or the one look, that's not the one look. Don't go there. It's that's going to get you there a little bit, but they're over promising a little bit. If you have somebody who's going to do a 2 hour long video of this is my grading process, and they've got actual like production credentials and they're worth listening to, that's the one that maybe, do an Alex and listen at 2x, but that's the one to pay attention to.
Alex, you have a real quick comment? We've got lots of questions here.
Just remember that Resolve is free. So Resolve is free. Just always remember that that you can do that. You can download this and start to play with it without spending a penny.
Let's get to the next question.
From Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Sarasota, Florida. Charles, if a director wants to have a black and white section of a film, do you ever get to adjust the look of that? I know, having recently done a lot of black and white work for my opera projections design, I notice how much that can be graded.
Charles.
Yes, so black and white is never just desaturated and just black and white and it just goes. Inside of Resolve and Flame and Basslight and all of them, let's say inside of Resolve, if you go to the RGB mixer inside of Resolve, you can actually play with how much red, blue, and green are affecting the black and white image. And if you test that out, it's going to give you a hugely different image. Like, it can let you pull out skin tones in black and white. Now, that's just if it's all desaturated completely. Most of the work that I've done that is mostly black and white, the director will at times, depending on the projector, if it's at a theater or if it's going to be for TV, they might want to add a little bit of a hint of warmth at the top end, the highlights, or maybe some cool at the bottom. So it might be perceived as black and white, but it has a hint of color underneath that will help tell the story a little bit better.
Let's go to the next question.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana, 422YUV takes advantage of the rods to cones ratio of the human eye. Has this color compromise become unnecessary, or will we need it as we move to HDR and 8K signals?
Alex?
It's also a file size issue. So you're going to see 422 and all kinds of other compromises continue to happen, especially as we go to HDR and 8K, because the bandwidth issues of delivering it to your house. And so no matter what we do, we can't get away from the bandwidth costs. So sure, we can send you 8K, but then we have to get it to you. And because we're moving to all IP, you have to remember that 4K is 4 times more than 1080p. 8K is 4 times more than 4K. So a solid 8K signal is in the 50 meg per second or above. And that's a solid, reasonably good, well compressed signal. And it's really closer, for a really good signal, not like a Netflix signal, which is not useful. So like a real signal is probably between 50 and 100 megs a second.
Let's go to the next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. In Final Cut Pro, how does the broadcast safe filter affect color grading?
Well, it is going to affect it. It pulls everything down into the acceptable range for broadcast. Usually has 100 IRE as kind of the upper limit. And it's quite possible in NLEs to get beyond these standard broadcast specifications. So it's kind of an overall major league top cap filter for that. Alex, do you have additional thoughts?
Yeah, don't do it. You fix it by hand. Don't turn any filters on that say anything says I'm going to make it broadcast safe or I'm going to do whatever. Fix it, do it correctly. Don't have an automatic setting do that for you. That's crazy.
Next question.
Mickey Makachor from Manila, Philippines. Is there a situation where you would prefer to color manage at the project level instead of color managing with nodes?
Charles?
It's typically when I'm working with a larger production and I'm just a small part of the larger color pipeline and they've already designated this is what we're working. Let's say if we're working inside of ACES, that is usually a situation where its entire pipeline is managed in that way. If I'm working on my own project for some commercials, I will typically go node-based because I have more fine controls over each shot that needs to look the best that it can look individually.
Next question.
Next question from Talalik Lopez Waterman again in Sarasota, Florida. Charles, have you graded iPhone 15 videos shot in log on the Blackmagic Design app? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Charles,
I have graded some iPhone footage, and I think it's magical that you could go and capture so much data on a device that you carry around in your pocket and you just kind of walk around and forget about it, where you would typically have a $60,000 camera. Now, that being said, it's a smaller sensor and it's a smaller lens, and there's a lot of caveats involved. But for what it can do, for what it is, it's pretty magical.
Charles, I'm interested in when you were doing that test, was there a type of shot that seemed to work better? Like do the wide landscapey type things, do they give you more trouble than, for example, a headshot that's well lit or something like that? What did you run into?
I ran into where if things are well lit and you plan to shoot beforehand, right, then it becomes less about the camera.
Okay, great. So, yeah. So run and gunning and thinking you're going to get great results out of it without shot composition and shot execution can be a problem.
Yes, you could say that. Like for example, a few months ago, we saw the Apple keynote, and everybody was amazed that it was shot on an iPhone. But then we showed the behind the scenes, and everybody noticed there's entire teams of set designers and lighting crews. And at the end of all that, you have the founder of Company 3, Stefan Sonnenfeld, grading it, right? So at that point, it is no longer about the sensor. The sensor is capturing so much data. It's not about the camera. At that point, it's about the creative decisions and the problem solving that very smart people can do throughout the pipeline. And that's what made the image so great. So it's a great sensor. Go out and shoot and go out as great as much as you can. You need to practice, but it's an amazing device.
Cool. Next question.
Adrian Watkins, Wellington, New Zealand. CJ, have you looked at Cinematch to assist base grading across different cameras?
CJ?
I have not. I usually I'm just using a color space transform to try to get it to the same place. I have not seen Cinematch, but I'll answer because I was directly addressed.
There you go. Next question.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. White brides dresses, human skin tones, and blue skies are colors that must look right in the final viewing. What other colors have you had to correct for? And have you ever used Pantone for video?
CJ, start us off.
I haven't used Pantone for video, but my number one concern is make sure my whites look white, make sure my blacks look black. Those are easy because I can just look at that waveform scope where they have the overlay, and when the red, the green, and the blue channels all line up, they stop being colors and they start turning white. But the other one is skin tone, and all those vector scopes have a skin tone indicator where you can say, where does that face or where does that skin tone sit? And if you're using a tool like Nobe Omniscope, it's a little bit more agile to do this kind of thing, but put a mask over your over the face. And then now your scopes are only going to reflect what's in the highlight. And now you can see, exactly where those skin tones are. The other tip is when you're in your scopes, go into the settings and turn on the display qualifier in scopes. Then when you put your eyedropper and select something, it'll show you exactly where that is on your scopes.
Charles?
I'd say foliage is usually skin tones, skies, and grass, trees. But to add to that, it's always about the creative intent. There's been a lot of situations where I've been in the room and there is a technician that is saying, oh, these reds are not matching what this is on the scope, right? But the client is paying you to make the reds this red, right? So if you look at our shots from films, let's say if you have a website, that's like Shot Deck, for example, you have a lot of stills from films, and you bring those into Resolve, you'll see that a lot of times your skin tones, what is perceived to be white or black or a skin tone, is off the line that you might see inside of your scopes, right? So that image is molded to look a certain way. And technically, based on the scopes, it might not say that it's right. But when you look at the image, you feel that it's right. And that's the balance that you always have to play, right? You can use your scopes to get things technically right, but then creatively, how is the image feeling? And that is always a balance that you have to play. Now, going back to Pantone, if you're doing, it's like a lot of beauty work or commercial work, a lot of clients will send you a Pantone deck that you have to match, right? And I actually have like this with me all the time. This is just skin tones, right? And I just have it on my desk and look at it every so often. But for products, there will be a particular color that you have to hit. And the difficulty with that is that if they're not here with you in the room, they're looking at it on an iPad or some other monitor or their TV, and you have to find a way to get what you see here in your room to them. And that's always a back and forth. But yeah, like every so often it happens.
It's interesting. I mean, Tiffany's concerned about their blue. They want it to be exactly that blue. I'm shocked. Let's go to the next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles wants to know, what is Rec 709?
CJ.
That is your standard color space for HD TV. So if you're delivering out and you're expecting it to be viewed on any HD TV, not HDR but SDR, that's your color space that you use.
Yeah, it's a recommendation that came out of the standards bodies, and everybody adheres. At least everybody knows what it is. Next question.
Dave Troutman, Edmonton, Canada. Can you copy and paste color page settings into other shots on the timeline to match them?
Let's see. Who was in for this one? CJ.
Sure can. If you click on I was playing with Charles's color here with the black and white but if I just hit Command C while I've selected this clip and then paste it over here, it'll paste all of those nodes exactly as I had them. So if the shots are exposed differently, they're not necessarily going to match. So I find the copy and paste useful for similar lighting conditions, or if I have the node tree, but not necessarily any of them changed, I'll use that to copy and paste the node structure.
Let's go to the next question.
It's Jeff Hedberg from New York asking, if you know you need to output to multiple standards like Rec 709, Rec 2020, etc., do you work in one color space and then simply convert afterwards? And do you need to continually check that what that conversion will look like on every shot as you go?
CJ.
What you can do at the very end where earlier in my presentation, I did a color space transform from my intermediate or mezzanine to my output format. You can actually do a parallel node there so that one of them is for one output and one of them is for another, HDR or SDR, and then you can enable and disable them to check as you go along the way. But that's how I would skin that cat.
Charles?
I will usually work in the color space that needs to be delivered first. If it's an HDR grade, I will work in that. I'll set all my monitors and timeline to that. And like CJ said, then I will switch back and I'll do a trim pass. On some occasions, if you have client to room and you have the capabilities, you will grade your HDR and SDR at the same time. It's a bit more complicated. It takes a bit more time, but some clients prefer that just so that they can approve exactly what the SDR and HDR is going to be looking like. But normally, I will grade in whatever needs to be done first to get out for broadcast.
Last question.
Mickey Makachor from Manila, Philippines. Charles, when delivering for review over Frame.io, do you transform to Rec 709 Gamma 2.2 or keep it at 2.4?
The way I have, if I'm working in Resolve, the way that I have my Resolve set up, I will do the Gamma at 709A. Which is something that Resolve did to try and fix that pesky gamma shift that we've all have encountered. But that is very particular to the way that I set up my system. In other systems, it might be, let's say, like a tag of sRGB that will get it to look correctly. And if your clients are working remotely and they're working on a particular browser, then you have to take that into account because different browsers will display certain things slightly differently if they're not reading the tags properly. So if I'm in Resolve, I will tag Rec 709 and then the Gamma instead of 709A, and that has worked for me. And we actually did a test yesterday, and that's still the best way to go for us.
So cool today. Thank you all. Thank you to CJ and to Charles for being here on our basic color thing. I think this has turned out to be a fabulous show. I enjoyed it immensely, and I hope everybody else did too. A couple of notes here, 2 hours of Q&A tomorrow. The new panelist meeting is Saturday, day after tomorrow. Don't forget about volunteering for NAB if you'd like to. That's in the Discord under Alex's announcements. If you're interested in being a panelist or volunteer, that's important. Go look and go vote on the YouTube Shorts. The Isadora Lab happens in 1 hour from now. Tomorrow, a basic primer on Genlock. No, I'm sorry. That's something from an old message there. That's wrong. That's an incredible opportunity. And then right after that, don't forget Mimo Live and Oliver Breidenbach. Our thanks to all the producers, everybody who submitted questions for today. We cannot do this show without your questions. You drive everything that happens here, and we truly appreciate the time you take to put those questions into the QR code system and into the general Mukana question system and how you vote on them. That really does make a huge difference. To the panelists, great panelists as always, and particularly today when we have experts coming in to freely give their knowledge to everybody who's watching the show. This show, that's what this show is all about, and we hugely appreciate everybody who shows up to do it. And we never forget the back-end crew, the incredible numbers of people who are doing so many tasks that are unsung in the background. From arranging guests, helping guide the guests through the processes of coming on the show. It is an amazing village of people who assembles every day to help us do office hours, and each and every one of them is incredibly valuable, and we thank them. Let's see, stats for today. Clock traversal, 76,593 miles. That's 123,264 kilometers, or more than 606 million bananas for scale. Office Hours is always open. See you tomorrow.
Charles, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. By the way, should I ditch my Pro Mist filter?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
You
thanks.
should. Yeah. So yes, CJ, great presentation too.
Embrace the wrinkles.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Charles,
And-
you're the maestro. Thank you so much for being here. That was so awesome
I know, man.
to share that with you.
No. I actually thank you for what you did, because so much of that gets lost in the YouTube videos that people see out there. So we needed a very straightforward, this is exactly what you need to be doing and understanding, because Resolve has so many options. People can quickly start making
Everyone
mistakes
just
and they don't know
glazes
that they're
over.
making a mistake. So,
Yeah, and they just glaze over if they don't have the basic steps.
And if you want to get started with it, it will run on a $220 Melee Quieter 4. I installed it and ran it,
You see?
and it actually runs.
The deliver page is a little slow.
Hey, if you can't color correct on your watch, you're way behind times.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
noise reduction might slow down the system, but it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Touch.
All right, see you guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Excellent show.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody.
Great job.
Thanks, Laura.
CJ, you okay?
Yeah, just